Furious tirades, conspiracy fantasies, an aversion to facts and an attraction to violence. Those are some of the common traits of a mentally ill person. They also happen to be traits ascribed to the President of the United States in a new book called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. It's an unprecedented and controversial collection of essays from 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts, all offering a pretty bleak assessment of the president's mental fitness. But is it even possible to diagnose Trump from afar in this way? Or does this new book provide an essential public service for all those concerned about the sanity of the most powerful man on earth? Joining me to discuss this are Bandy Lee, an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Yale School of Medicine and the editor of this new book, and Betty Teng, a trauma therapist and one of the contributors to it. Thanks both for joining me on UpFront. Bandy Lee, let me begin with you. You conceived of and put together this new book about President Trump's mental health. You convinced numerous mental health professionals to contribute their assessments, all of which together paint a very dire picture of the mental state of the President of the United States. Why did you write this book? And in a sentence or two, what is the main message of this book?
I would first, if I may, like to make clear that I'm speaking on my own behalf and not representing the views of Yale University, Yale School of Medicine, or Yale Department of Psychiatry. To answer your question, we are a group of mental health experts who have come to a consensus conclusion about an issue that is of vital interest to the public, and that the public has a right to know, basically, that Mr. Trump in the office of the presidency is a danger to the public and the international community.
According to a study by experts at the Duke University Medical Center, Bandy, around 1 in 4 US presidents have had some sort of mental illness while in office. Why is Trump so special and so different to merit this particular book, which calls him a danger?
Mental illness itself does not involve unfitness for duty, an incapacity to carry out a duty. It's really the specific symptoms, the severity of the symptoms, and the particular combination of impulsivity, recklessness, an inability to accept facts, rage reactions, an attraction to violence, a proneness to incite violence. All these things are signs of danger.
Betty, your contribution to this book unpacks this wider societal impact that Trump has had on the US. You talk about a post-Trump stress disorder that has spread since the election. You say in the book that the Trump presidency has been more unsettling in some ways than the events of 9/11. How can the act of one man winning one election cause people trauma? Isn't that a bit much, a lot of people will say?
I mean, it was curious to me, too, because it's not a natural disaster. It's not something that's caused anybody any physical harm. It was a peaceful election. However, people's reactions out of it, insomnia, agitation, instability, feelings of high anxiety, I mean, it doesn't correlate exactly to PTSD, which is what many of my patients suffer from. However, the reactions need to be paid attention to, since so many have suffered from it. And I don't see my position as a left or right. I see people having a reaction to this election and to this man's aggressive words and volatility and switching positions constantly as being not in keeping with the leader of the free world. And safety really is the primary concern of a trauma therapist, to keep to work with our patients and how to keep them safe. And this is something that's impacting a lot of people in a very deep way.
Bandy, the pushback to this book in your field, in your profession, has been pretty intense in some ways. One prominent psychiatrist, Alan Francis, a professor emeritus of psychiatry, who actually wrote a manual on diagnosing mental disorders. He's come out publicly to denounce the very premise underlying the book. He says bad behavior is rarely a sign of mental illness. Psychiatric name-calling is a misguided way of countering Trump's attack on democracy. What do you say to him?
Actually, I don't think we're that much in disagreement. We are declaring dangerousness, which is different from making a diagnosis. I am of the camp that believes it is necessary to do a full interview and to look at all information, including any medical conditions, any other disorders that could explain, or any other factors that could explain the behavior before making a diagnosis. So we are not purporting to make a diagnosis. I have requested that all contributors refrain from making a diagnosis, but we are saying that he is a danger and therefore needs to be fully evaluated urgently.
People would say a lot of presidents were narcissists, a lot of presidents incited violence, a lot of presidents were egomaniacs, but people didn't write books like this, people didn't question their fitness for office. What makes Trump so special is what I'm trying to get at, that you've written this book.
Well, I can tell you as an expert on violence that he has shown many signs of dangerousness. The most obvious ones might be verbal aggressiveness, history of sexual assault, incitement of violence at his rallies, attraction to violence and powerful weapons, provocation of hostile nations, and more recently, endorsement of violence, which happened during Charlottesville, which would create a culture that generates epidemics of violence, and sparring with another nuclear power that has an unstable leader. Okay. All these things are signs of dangerousness.
Betty, what would you say to people who say that constantly questioning Trump's mental fitness for office is pretty offensive to people who do have some form of mental illness but do their jobs perfectly well, who don't pose a threat to anyone? Does this book risk stigmatizing mentally ill people?
I mean, one of the contributors, Jim Gillian, speaks about the difference between dangerousness and mental illness. Not all mentally ill people are dangerous, and not all dangerous people are mentally ill. And I think we, as a group, are using our expertise to speak out in the ways that we can about the impact of this individual who is now in this position of power. But I think at the base, he does not hold the qualifications necessary. His best qualification is that he's a very, very good self-promoter.
There's been talk of setting up a commission of mental health experts to evaluate every president going forward, to provide advice to Congress, perhaps, about their fitness for office. In your opinions, if you were asked by Congress, should Donald Trump be removed from office based on his mental state? Should the 25th Amendment, which discusses what to do if the president has an inability to discharge the powers and duties of his office, should the 25th Amendment be invoked? What would you say if you were asked that question, Bandy?
Well, we're merely recommending that procedures be put in place to evaluate, as you said, every presidential candidate and every president in the same manner that every military officer and every civilian service person is put through, that the commander-in-chief is not put to the same test, is a glaring omission. Currently, we are advocating for setting up an expert panel to advise a commission or any legal body.
But clearly, given what you're saying and given this book you put together and the conference you held at Yale to question some of the stuff surrounding Trump, clearly you're of the view that there is a case for removing him based on his mental state.
There are many signs pointing in that direction. And so we're calling for an urgent evaluation.
Okay, and just one final question. If he does have some sort of mental or psychological issue, if he is unstable, as he seems to be to many around him, even Republican senators, how worried should we therefore be that this guy has the nuclear codes? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much does that concern you both?
Well, that is our critical concern, that his condition is actually probably far worse than people are detecting now. That mental impairment goes deeper and is far more pervasive than people can understand when they are untrained in psychological matters, and that the worst is yet to come.
Betty?
10.
10?
No, honestly, I think that, as Bandy put it, his impulsivity, his lack of recognition of consequence in any realm, be it from speaking against NFL football players to speaking against Kim Jong-un, there's no context to his behavior in his mind. His solipsism is quite concerning. So I think it's something to be deeply worried about.
Betty Teng, Bandy Lee, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me on UpFront. That's our show. UpFront will be back next week.